Good morning, everyone. This is Mr. Lipchick, and our topic for discussion today is terrorism. What we will discuss, what you will learn today, includes what is terrorism, what is the nature of it, historical examples of terrorism, methods of terrorism, causes of terrorism, and ways to prevent terrorism. So, what is terrorism? Terrorism is defined as an unlawful act of violence used to intimidate governments or societies and to achieve political, religious, or ideological objectives. The hope of the terrorist is that the psychological and emotional impact of his or her violence will be far greater than the actual impact, the actual physical impact, that is. So, the goal of the terrorist is to create terror or extreme fear in the minds of a very large audience. And of course, this audience will put political pressure on the government, so hope the terrorists. They are out to send a message about their cause, and they usually lack the numbers or political power to bring about the changes they want and resort to terrorist tactics in order to try to achieve their goals. Terrorism is nothing new in history. It has been documented throughout human history, even in ancient times. As more destructive technologies have become available, terrorists have employed them. For instance, in 1881, Tsar Alexander II of Russia was assassinated by radicals using dynamite, a new invention by Alfred Nobel. Nobel, of course, hoped that it would have peaceful uses. In 1919, a series of bombings rocked the United States. Anarchists, individuals who wanted to eliminate government, claimed responsibility for this. Booby-trapped packages were mailed to top government officials throughout the United States, including the Attorney General. A night watchman was killed, and a housekeeper was maimed, but no government officials were injured. There were some very observant postmasters who intercepted most of these packages. So the U.S. government responded with the Palmer raids under Attorney General Mitchell Palmer, and they investigated and raided a number of anarchist headquarters, and those anarchists who were foreign-born were deported to their home countries. Between 1978 and 1995, Ted Kaczynski, a Harvard-educated mathematician known as the Unabomber, engaged in a nationwide campaign of mail bombings. His homemade bombs killed 3 and injured 23. And he was a radical environmentalist and targeted people involved in science and technology. He lived in a little cabin in the woods where he manufactured his bombs by hand. In 1995, he published a manifesto in the New York Times, and his brother recognized his writing, and he turned him in. And the only reason he wasn't executed was that it is believed that he was insane. The U.S. has been subject to both domestic and international terrorism. The 9/11 attacks were carried out by Saudi Arabian terrorists. Other terror attacks, such as the Oklahoma City bombing, however, were carried out by domestic terrorists. There's a picture of the Oklahoma federal building that was bombed a number of years ago. Methods of terrorism. Suicidal martyrdom is one method. This is where the terrorist gives up his or her life for the cause in the belief that he or she will be rewarded in the afterlife. Suicide martyrs in modern times are usually connected with a religious group and use explosives to kill in crowded places. Terror groups turn to young and impressionable youths as recruits for suicide bombing because they lack the experience and wisdom to know the folly of what they're doing. Biological weapons have been used for centuries to perform acts of terror, long before people even knew what germs were. Ancient peoples would pollute water supplies with the deceased bodies to infect their enemies with diseases. Blankets infected with smallpox were given to Native Americans during the French and Indian War with the knowledge that Native Americans had not been exposed to it and had no immunity to it and would die from it. And in modern times, anthrax was mailed to government officials during the 9/11 terror attacks, and it was several years before the perpetrator was actually found. They did figure out who it was, and the individual was a scientist in a government lab, and the individual took his own life. But it took several years. Letters were mailed to top government officials. It was a very frightening period of time. Chemical methods of terror are also used. In 1995, terrorists used a chemical nerve agent in a Tokyo subway. Nerve agents are extremely deadly. You breathe in a little bit of it, and it destroys your body's nervous system and your ability to continue breathing and your heart pumping and so on. 12 people were killed and 53 were seriously injured. And mass hysteria was observed with many unnecessary hospital admissions. Pay particular note to that last point. That was the goal of the terrorist. Not necessarily to kill 12 people, but to cause the mass hysteria. No incidents of nuclear terrorism have occurred. Nuclear devices are large and cumbersome. They're not something you can, sneak into your house. It is possible that an attack could cause a meltdown at a nuclear reactor, spreading radiation. And a nuclear dirty bomb would not cause a mass explosion as a true nuclear device would, but could spread nuclear dust and debris, infecting thousands. So basically, what kills people from this irradiation is what is known as radiation sickness. The radioactive rays that come out of these nuclear devices, they will cause deformities within your cell's genetic structure, and they will lead to widespread cases of leukemia and things like that, and people will die from cancer. So why do terrorists do what they do? Okay, what are the causes of terror? What all historical examples have in common is that each case involves a weaker group that feels powerless to change their circumstances through political means. This leaves them with feelings of frustration that build into anger and drive them to carry out their terrorist missions. While they hope to create political, social, economic, or religious change, the terrorist acts only serve to weaken their causes further. No society condones terrorism, and it usually just causes resistance within a country. And it causes the government, wherever it is, to crack down even harder. Most acts of terrorism have strong political or religious motives. The terrorist feels completely justified in his actions, even when innocent people are killed. When asked about how the parents of the 19 children killed in the Oklahoma City bombings should feel, Timothy McVeigh responded they should get over it. And I think that kind of encapsulates how the mindset of the terrorist is. They don't see things from the perspective of others, only from their own perspective. So, what can be done to prevent terrorism? The most fundamental and important method for preventing terrorism is to address its root causes. Some of the root causes are as simple as ignorance, disrespect, failure to communicate, and failure to cooperate. And, if you look at the underlying terrorist movements, a lot of them can be traced back to misunderstandings. Education about and tolerance for other cultures and societies is essential if we are going to, live in a world with multiple types of cultures and beliefs. Secondary systems for preventing terrorism include surveillance and monitoring, using intelligence information gathered through the internet, electronic surveillance, satellite, and other methods. It's very important and useful. And a good surveillance system is a strong deterrent to terrorist activity. Those cameras you see to the right, even if they weren't working, people would notice them, and they would curtail a lot of behaviors that they might otherwise do. Measures also need to be taken in advance to minimize the impact of a potential terror attack. Safety procedures for large population centers, such as evacuation plans, and provisions for medical assistance and psychological measures must be put into place. What you see to the right is the Boston Marathon bombing that occurred a few years ago. Fortunately, they were prepared. They had police and fire and medical, and they saved a great number of lives as a result. So, as you read through the material and move through the section, here are some things to consider. What impact have terrorists had on the United States? What potential economic consequences are there for the terrorist attack? Is it possible to completely eliminate terrorism in the future? Should our response be different if it is a domestic or international terrorist group that was responsible? And will terrorist attacks increase or decrease in the future? Thank you for your attention. I look forward to seeing you in the live lesson. Be sure to have a great day. Bye-bye.